Thank you, Dr. Craig. We now move to our rebuttal portion of our debate. First, Dr. Borg, 10 minutes.
I want to begin with two relatively quick comments and then launch into a more extended exposition of something. The first comment is this. Several times during Bill Craig's presentation, he spoke of most New Testament scholars, the majority of New Testament scholars, etc. I can quote as many authorities as he does. We read different people. And that's because what you are seeing here is a debate or a dialogue between, and I should let you label the branch of scholarship that you are most familiar with. I don't know if you would speak of it as conservative scholarship or how you would label it. And I represent moderate to liberal scholarship. And in my reading, the majority of New Testament scholars agree with me. I don't think there's any real point in citing contemporary authorities and counting up noses and so forth. We could each do that ad nauseum, and it wouldn't be very interesting to you. Second quick comment, he has also said that I've offered no evidence or argumentation for my position. And I simply want to note that we have tightly constrained time limits. And for me, for example, right now, to try to respond to his points one by one with any degree of analysis would be absolutely impossible in 10 minutes. So too would a mustering of all the reasons for seeing the Gospels as I see them. We are dealing with two different paradigms for seeing the Gospels, and that's what the big difference is here. Okay? Now to move to the more extended exposition. It's very important for you all to realize that our differences are both historical and theological. To say something about the historical differences first. As I listened to what he was saying, it seems to me that our primary historical difference is on the question, was the tomb empty? I think we both agree that Jesus appeared to his followers. I certainly affirm that myself, and I heard him affirming that too. It would be interesting, and I would love you to respond to this if you would, Bill. Do you imagine that if you had been there with a camera, that you could have gotten photographs of Jesus appearing to Mary Magdalene, or Jesus appearing in the upper room to Thomas and the rest of the disciples and so forth? When you say Jesus rose bodily from the dead, are you implying that it's that kind of event that could have been photographed, could have been videotaped? And I see that to be on a continuum with his strong defense of the historicity of the empty tomb, that we're talking about the transformation of a corpse here on Bill's understanding. I think that's our primary historical difference. Okay? And I'm not here arguing that I know for certain that the tomb was not empty. I have no interest in trying to prove that the tomb was not empty. My point is the more subtle but important one, that as I see things, whether or not the tomb was empty is irrelevant to the truth of Easter. And then I would go on to say, I think affirming that the tomb was empty and that the cause of that is a supernatural intervention by God that transformed the corpse of Jesus in a way that has never happened anywhere else or to anybody else, I think that affirmation does create problems. But again, what I'm trying to sharpen here is that, as I see it, the primary historical difference is, was the tomb empty? Did something happen to the corpse of Jesus? That's the historical difference. The theological difference is this: how much does that matter? And you've heard Bill say, if the tomb wasn't empty, then Christianity is a delusion. It matters very much indeed theologically on his analysis. And for me, it really doesn't. And I don't know that you can quote Paul, as Bill has just done, to support his position at this point. In that same chapter, 1 Corinthians 15, where he says in verse 14, if Christ has not been raised from the dead, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. In that same chapter, Paul speaks of his own experience of the risen Christ, which was clearly a vision. And he even puts his own experience in a list with the experiences of the others, implying that they had similar kinds of experiences to his own. And then later in the chapter, when Paul addresses the question, with what kind of body are the dead raised, Paul explicitly denies that it is the physical body, the flesh and blood body, and speaks instead of a spiritual body. So Paul unambiguously affirms a bodily resurrection, but says it's a spiritual body. And I'm very, very comfortable with that. Bill has also suggested that my understanding of metaphor kind of doesn't work. Let me affirm as strongly as I know how, metaphor is about something. And what do the stories, I'm not saying the risen Christ is a metaphor. I'm saying the Easter stories are metaphorical narratives. And what they are about is that they are about that affirmation. Jesus is a figure of the present, not of the past. Jesus is a living spiritual reality. To the extent that we can use literal language about this, that is the literal meaning, as I see it, of the metaphorical narratives about Easter. And let me use my remaining 3 minutes to illustrate that concretely by reminding you of the story of the Emmaus Road. You all, most of you anyway, kind of know how it goes. It's the day we call Easter Sunday. 2 followers of Jesus are walking from Jerusalem to Emmaus, a village about 7 miles away, according to Luke. And as they're walking, they're joined by a stranger. Now, we as the readers know the stranger to be the risen Christ, but they don't know that. And they walk together for several hours. They talk, they converse. The 2 followers share with the risen Christ their hopes that they had had for Jesus, and now he's been crucified and so forth. They talk about Scripture together, and after journeying together for several hours, no recognition yet, they arrive at the village of Emmaus. It's getting late, it's getting dark. The stranger is about to leave them, and they say to the stranger, "Stay with us, for it is evening, and the day is far spent." Or in the words of the King James Version, "Abide with us, fast falls the eventide. The darkness is coming on, stay with us." And so the stranger agrees. They go in, they still haven't recognized him. They sit down for a meal. The stranger takes bread, blesses it, and breaks it. And then we are told their eyes were opened and they recognized him in the breaking of the bread. And then you know what happens. He vanishes from their sight. Now, if you had had a video cam, do you think if you had been there, you could have photographed the 3 of them traveling together, recorded the conversation and so forth? You only have to ask that question, I think, to begin to wonder, maybe it's not that kind of story. Maybe it's a metaphorical narrative, a symbolic story. And the truth of that story, I would say, is this. The risen Christ journeys with us, whether we know it or not, believe it or not, realize it or not, and yet there are those moments of recognition. And according to the story itself, those moments sometimes come through Scripture, they sometimes come through communion, Eucharist, the Mass, whatever you call it in your tradition, and they come in other ways as well. The literal truth of that story is the risen Christ is a figure of the present, who continues to be known to this day. Thank you.